Hello everyone and welcome to the video. In the lands between, death is never the end. It is just another transformation. And nowhere is that truth more terrifying or beautiful than in the tale of Malenia, Blade of Miquella. There is a flower that grows not in sunlight but in filth. Its petals are not kissed by dew but soaked in blood and bile. This is no metaphor. This flower is real. And it blooms only when all hope rots away. Deep within the rotted plains of Gaelid, in a crater left by gods, lies the scarlet Aeonia, a bloom not born from soil but from sacrifice, not watered by rain but by pain. It is Malenia's legacy, a warrior undefeated by any blade, yet devoured from the inside by a divine parasite. She was forged for greatness, yet fated for decay. And within her lived a force far older, far darker than any demigod. This is her story, not just of war, but of will, not just of curse, but of choice, of a woman who refused to be consumed, even as she spread a god's plague with every step. Malenia's tale is not one of simple tragedy, it is one of divine contradiction, to destroy while protecting, to wither while fighting, to bloom while dying. And as you'll come to see, the rot was never her enemy, it was her destiny. From the moment of her birth, Malenia was not her own. Born an Empyrean, one of only a handful chosen to potentially succeed Queen Marika, Malenia was marked for divinity. But the gift she was given was poisoned. An outer god, long buried and rarely spoken of, had already laid claim to her soul. This god had no name that mortals could remember, and no form that could be worshipped in safety. It did not build churches or demand sacrifice, it simply waited. Waited for something, or someone, to rot. That someone was Malenia. The scarlet rot was not a sickness. It was a divine force, a cosmic law made flesh, whose desire was not domination but dissolution. Its goal was to break down all structure, all life, all motion, until only stillness and silence remained. To worship it was to accept oblivion as sacred. And Malenia, she didn't worship it, she fought it. But her rune, the divine mark she was born with, had already been corrupted at its core. She didn't just carry the rot, she embodied it. It seeped into her bones, her breath, her being. Where other demigods inherited strength or grace, Malenia inherited a contradiction. Power through corruption, divinity through deterioration. And so, from her first breath, her life became a war on two fronts, against the world that feared her, and the god that lived inside her. Yet she never bowed, not once. In the world of Elden Ring, most people fear the Scarlet Rot. To them, it is a curse, a blight, a cruel mutation of nature. But those people only see the surface. Scarlet Rot is not a sickness, it is a sacrament, and to the few who dare look deeper, it is not a plague, but a path. Long before Malenia's birth, there were those who revered the rot, not as corruption, but as a divine principle. These were not mindless fanatics, but philosophers, ascetics, and death worshippers who believed that decay was not the enemy of life, it was its inevitable successor. These forgotten cults wore robes of mushroomed cloth and let the rot take their flesh as part of their fate. To decay was to draw nearer to the god beneath. To be consumed was to be cleansed. And they may have been right, because the scarlet rot does not behave like a traditional disease. It infects crystal, it spreads through rock, it corrodes beings without flesh, such as the Crystallians, and even alters the fundamental properties of magic itself. How could an ordinary illness do such a thing? It can't. This is why lore texts describe the rot as the divine essence of a forgotten outer god. Not a force of chaos, but of spiritual entropy, a cosmic truth that all things must end. And not just end, but feed the next form. It is a cycle of renewal through total destruction. In this light, Malenia's condition takes on new meaning. She is not merely afflicted, she is the chosen vessel for a power that predates kingdoms, demigods, and even the Golden Order. Her suffering is ritual, her body is an altar, and still she resists. But as the cultists of the rot knew, resistance feeds the god. The more Malenia fought to suppress the scarlet rot within, the stronger it grew. The outer god did not need her permission, it already had her blood. Before Malenia, before the Clean Rot Knights, before even the Halictry's first leaf unfurled, there was another war waged in silence, a war to seal the god of rot. This war is not recorded in the history of heroes. No statue honors its victor, no rune bears his name, but he exists hidden between the lines of lore. He is known only as the Blind Swordsman. This mysterious warrior is mentioned only in passing, through scattered references in item descriptions and weapon lore. But his legacy is carved into the bones of the world. He was the one who sealed away the rot god before it could devour everything. Guided by a spirit known only as the Blue Dancer, a mythic figure of water and wind, the swordsman fought not with brute strength but with motion. And this matters, because in the world of the Scarlet Rot, stillness is death. The rot thrives where nothing moves. It settles, it festers, it digests, but water is life through movement. And the blind swordsman's sword, shaped like flowing water, was the only weapon capable of resisting the rot's divine stillness. What followed was not merely a duel of blades, it was a battle of philosophies, a confrontation between a god who wanted all things to decay into silence, and a man who believed that life is only found in motion. The details are lost to time, but the outcome is known. The god was sealed, not destroyed, for no god in the lands between ever truly dies, but imprisoned deep below, in the lake of rot, its body shattered and its voice silenced. But sealing the rot god was no final solution. The cost was immense. Some say the blind swordsman gave his life. Others believe he was blinded by the very power he sought to contain. Still others whispered that he wandered into the rivers of Siofra and became part of the flow itself, his soul mingling with the water. Whatever became of him, his legacy would not be forgotten. For centuries later, a new warrior would arise. A woman with half a god's blood and all of a god's curse. A woman trained in the very same swordplay. A woman who, like him, used motion as her salvation. Malenia. She would inherit not just his technique, but the same burden. For where the blind swordsman sealed the god, Malenia carried it. In the divine crucible of the lands between, gods are not born, they are forged. But sometimes, fate forges more than one path in the same flame. Malenia did not enter this world alone. She was born with a twin, Miquella. Together, they were golden children, Empyreans, divine successors, each carrying the potential to inherit the throne from Queen Marika. But they were not born equal, they were not even born whole. Miquella was gifted, radiant, a miracle in the eyes of the Golden Order. His rune was one of abundance, and he exuded an aura of generosity, grace, and harmony. But for all his potential, he was cursed to eternal childhood, a body that could never mature, no matter how wise his soul became. Malenia, by contrast, bore a different affliction. She wasn't just incomplete, she was possessed. The Scarlet Rot had already claimed her from the womb. Their story is one of divine symmetry. Miquella, the nurturer, who could never grow. Malenia, the destroyer, who could never be healed. And yet, where others would see contradiction, the twins saw completion. Miquella loved Malenia not despite her rot, but because of her resolve. He did not fear what she carried. He respected her strength to fight it. She, in turn, trusted only him. In a world where gods and men turned their faces from her, Miquella was the one hand she never doubted. Together, they turned their backs on the Golden Order. They saw its false promises, its inability to accept imperfection, and in defiance, they built something of their own. The Halictry, a haven for the broken, the abandoned, the malformed. A sanctuary where rot was not shunned, but sheltered. Where those cast aside by the Earth Tree might find something new to believe in. And through all this, Miquella's focus never wavered. To save his sister, he studied unalloyed gold, a material resistant to all influence, even the meddling of outer gods. From it, he crafted a golden needle, designed not to destroy the rot, but to keep it contained. A cage of sacred purity. He also designed her armor, her prosthetics, her sword. Every piece was a love letter in steel and gold, proof that he would not let her fade no matter the cost. But even gold has limits, and Malenia was changing. As she grew stronger, so did the god within. Every battle made her bloom, every wound whispered seduction, and somewhere in her heart she began to fear not death, but victory. because she knew that the rod did not need her to fall. It only needed her to win. To live was a constant war. To stand was an act of rebellion. And for Malenia, every breath came at the cost of something rotted away. Her body, once divine, had become an arena, not just for battles fought with steel, but for a deeper war, one waged in silence against the very force that defined her existence. The scarlet rot, flesh decayed, nerves failed, limbs blackened and withered, year by year, and yet she endured. But endurance alone wouldn't be enough, not forever. The god inside her did not sleep. It waited, it fed. Every act of resistance was another offering. Her salvation came not from a miracle, but from her brother, Miquella. Using his vast, forbidden knowledge of alchemy and divine metallurgy, Miquella created what no other being dared to attempt: a new kind of purity, unalloyed gold, a metal so absolute in its essence that no force, not even an outer god, could corrupt it. With this, he began to build, not hope, not promises, tools. The first was the golden needle, a sliver of radiant purity, forged to suppress the rot's influence. It did not cure her, nothing could. But it held the god at bay, damming the rot, behind walls of light and intention. The needle was more than a physical object. It was a line in the sand, a boundary she refused to cross. As long as it remained inside her, the rot could not bloom, but the cost was immense. The strain on her body continued. Her limbs collapsed, her bones cracked under the weight of defiance. So Miquella adapted. When her leg succumbed, he gave her steel. When her arm withered, he gave her gold-forged prosthetics laced with unalloyed plating, infused with holy geometry, designed to ward off divine interference. These prosthetics weren't tools of violence, they were extensions of hope. Every piece of armor she wore, every blade she carried, her brother's genius enabled every movement she made. Her body became a holy machine, not despite the rot, but because of it. And yet, this transformation was not mechanical, it was deeply personal. Malenia was no longer merely resisting the rot, she was living with it, commanding it, wearing it like a second skin, forged in the crucible of sacrifice. Others would see a warrior with golden limbs and assumed strength, but what they saw was love made visible. And deep within her heart, the question remained, could she keep resisting forever? Because she knew, and so did Miquella, that the rot waits, and one day the needle would break. In a land where might is measured by ruin and kings are crowned in blood, Malenia rose, not by brute force, but by grace. Her strength wasn't found in overwhelming power, but in control, precision, discipline, and above all else, motion. She did not learn to kill as most warriors do. She was taught to flow. Her swordsmanship was not inherited from Marika or Godfrey, nor taught in the schools of the Earth Tree. It was passed down from another time, another warrior, the same warrior who once sealed the rot god with the sword of flowing water, the blind swordsman. This unnamed master, now half myth and half memory, taught the philosophy as much as a technique, that to move is to resist, to keep flowing is to keep rotting at bay. Malenia took that lesson into every limb, prosthetic or not. Her style was not just efficient, it was poetic, and from that art she forged her greatest weapon, the waterfowl dance, a whirlwind of motion, spinning, leaping, slicing in a pattern that mimics birds in flight over water. Each arc of her blade is timed like breath, each step in the air a defiance of death. To witness the dance is to feel awe, to face it is to feel your end. But there is meaning beneath the motion. The waterfowl is not a predator. It glides, avoiding the current, mastering stillness by staying in motion, just like Malenia. Because the moment she stops, the moment she steals, the rot begins again. So she never stops moving. Even her death blows are acts of survival. Her dance is sacred, a ritual not to slay her enemies, but to maintain herself. Every battle is her body's plea for more time. Others wield blades to conquer. Malenia wields hers to endure. And though her limbs may be metal and her body cracked with decay, when she moves, she is divine. She is not a demigod because of her blood. She is a goddess because she refuses to fall. But within her chest, buried beneath gold and discipline, the rot god watches. It watches her move. It waits for her to slow. And when she does, it will bloom. While Malenia warred with herself, another legend was rising in the distant east. Not a demigod of decay, but of defiance. A titan of a man who challenged the very sky. A general whose strength was so vast, his very name stilled the heavens. Star Scourge Radahn, born the son of Renala, queen of the full moon, and Radagon, consort of Marika. Radahn was a child of celestial and golden lineages. But from an early age he stood apart, not for his heritage, but for his choice. Radahn loved war, not for conquest, not for blood, but for control. He believed in dominion over chaos, mastery over the unknowable, and nowhere was this more apparent than in his obsession with gravity magic. It's said he learned it not from scholars, but from the Alabaster Lords, strange creatures touched by the void beyond stars. From them, Radahn discovered a power far greater than any blade, the ability to bend reality itself. He first used it for a simple kindness, to ride his beloved horse, Leonard, despite his growing size, a god giant floating to stay beside his smallest friend. But that power soon served a much larger purpose. At some point, perhaps in fear, perhaps in foresight, Radahn turned his attention skyward. He saw the stars move, he saw fate written in their paths, and he said, no. Using his strength, he froze the cosmos. The night sky stopped turning. The messengers of destiny, celestial bodies known only to sorcerers and prophets, were locked in place. The future, suspended. It wasn't an act of pride, it was a shield. Radahn sought to protect the lands between, from what lay beyond, forces like the greater will, the formless mother, the frenzied flame. And perhaps, in that same silence above, he sensed the wrought god stirring below. In his stillness, Radahn became the opposite of Malenia. She moved to resist her fate. He held the stars motionless to prevent his. And it worked. For a time. His castle, Redmane Keep, became a fortress of warriors, philosophers, and flame wielders. His army was a brotherhood, not of conquest, but of purpose. He was not worshipped, he was followed, but the mind that carried such weight slowly cracked. The stars did not like to be caged, and neither do gods. And far across the fields, Malenia was marching, prosthetic limbs creaking, sword shimmering, gold needle trembling within her flesh. She was not coming to stop the stars, she was coming to bloom. Before Malenia reached Caelid, before the battle of Aeonia shook the skies and curdled the land, there was a brief and almost laughable interruption. Godrick, the Grafted. A demigod by blood, a king by name, but a coward by spirit. Godrick ruled over Stormvale Castle, once a proud bastion of warrior kings. But his reign was hollow, his lineage stretched thin, far removed from the glory of Godfrey, the first Elden Lord. He bore the name, but not the strength. And so, he turned to a grotesque form of empowerment, grafting. He took limbs from fallen warriors, arms, legs, torsos, sometimes whole bodies, and sewed them into his own frame. What he lacked in word, he tried to replace with volume, but no number of arms could make him a lion. When Malenia arrived at the borders of Limgrove on her march to Caelid, Godrick likely thought himself a checkpoint, a challenge. Instead, he became a footnote. There is no record of a battle between them, no scars on the land, only the shame of a failed display of arrogance. Malenia didn't slay him, she ignored him, and that was worse. Because for Godrick, nothing mattered more than legacy, recognition, to be remembered as a true demigod, a true heir to the throne of Marika. But when Malenia passed through his lands without pause, without even drawing her blade, she denied him that honor. She treated him not as a rival, but as irrelevant. From that moment on, Godrick spiraled further into desperation. He became obsessed with the idea of strength, not as something earned, but collected. He harvested more limbs, crafted more horrors. He turned his castle into a butcher's workshop, all in the hope that one day someone would mistake him for a god again. But Malenia never looked back. She wasn't there to fight children playing king. She was marching towards something far greater and far deadlier than a throne. And in her silence, she dealt Godrick the deepest cut of all. In the annals of the lands between, there are many wars, but none more ruinous, more transformative, more cursed than the confrontation that unfolded in the crimson wastes of Caelid. the Battle of Aeonia. On one side stood General Radahn, Star Scourge, Tyrant of Gravity and Anchor of the very cosmos. On the other, Malenia the Severed, undefeated, unyielding, and unknowingly harboring a god. This was not a war of ideology nor of conquest. It was something stranger, a collision of inevitabilities. Radahn had stalled the stars, halted fate, and frozen the very sky. Malenia had been marching steadily toward her breaking point, limb by limb, breath by breath, step by step. Their meeting was not chance. It was cosmic pressure made flesh. The Redmane Knights prepared the battlefield, knowing their general would face one of the greatest demigods to walk the lands between. And the Cleanrot Knights, Malenia's devoted inner circle, followed her without question, knowing the battlefield might be their tomb. They did not fight for land, they fought for principles too large for words: stasis versus motion, suppression versus eruption, fate versus decay. The two demigods clashed. Radahn's gravity magic tore holes through battalions. His spears broke the backs of siege towers. His roars silenced commanders. He was a god of war made manifest, but Malenia flowed through his chaos. Her prosthetics hummed with golden resonance. Her blade spun not as a weapon, but as a hymn. With every movement, she rewrote the rules of mortality. They say the battle raged for days. Neither could gain ground, neither could fall, and the land around them began to change. The longer they fought, the more the rot stirred. Malenia, despite her flawless technique and will of steel, began to slip. The gold needle trembled inside her. Her mind blurred. Her breath slowed. Radahn drove her back. And in that moment, cornered, weakened, wounded, she made a choice. She let go. The unalloyed needle that had kept the rot at bay, her final tether to control, shattered. And from her broken body bloomed the scarlet Aeonia. It did not burst. It did not roar. It unfolded, a divine flower of filth and pain erupting from the earth, consuming all. Caelid died that day. Radahn was swallowed in the bloom. The Cleanrot Knights vanished into crimson fog. The Redmanes were left leaderless, disfigured, scattered like ash. And Malenia, she did not die, but she was not whole, not anymore. She had bloomed. The bloom faded, but its scar remained. The battle of Aeonia did not end with a victor. It ended with silence, with stillness, with decay. Malenia was gone. Radahn was broken, and Caelid was changed forever. What had once been a scorched and militarized borderland was now something else entirely, a wound on the surface of the world. Flesh-like flora rose from the earth. Trees decayed from the roots up. The soil itself turned against life. Where the scarlet Aeonia had opened, it never truly closed. And though its petals had folded inward, the god it spoke for had awakened. This was no ordinary devastation. It was a revelation. In the days that followed, dragons fled the skies. Even the ancient decaying worms of Grael's brood would not land where Malenia had bloomed. The winds shifted. The stars, once held by Radahn's will, now began to stir again. Prophets and shamans came to the edges of Aeonia and wept. Some tore their eyes out, others carved scarlet blossoms into their flesh. And far from the bloom, in a throne room beneath a tree, a young knight named Finlay lifted Malenia's body. She did not bleed. She barely breathed. But she lived. Finlay, last of the Cleanrot faithful, carried her goddess across the poisoned heart of the world, through beasts, madness, and flame, and brought her back to the Halic tree. There she would slumber, not in peace, not in death, but in hibernation, a cocoon for a goddess unfinished. Meanwhile, Radahn was not dead. He wandered the sand-drowned coastlines of Caelid, mindless and malformed, spear sticking from his back, feet eroded by the same rot he had once defied. He no longer remembered the stars he had frozen. The Redmane Knights, his loyal legion, saw what their general had become, and they burned everything. They torched their banners, they razed their own fortresses, and in a final act of loyalty they prepared a ritual, a festival, not to honor a living legend, but to send him off with dignity. The festival of combat was not born of celebration, but of grief. Their hope that one day a champion would arrive, not to avenge Radahn, but to free him. As for the world, the bloom whispered, the rot spread, and in hidden places a new religion began to form, one not of worship, but of adoration, of rot, of ruin of the goddess who bloomed. The world is quick to reject what it does not understand, but Rot is patient. Where others saw Malenia's bloom as horror, some saw it as a sign, and in the shadows of shattered kingdoms, they began to build altars. In Caelid's plague-choked hollows, insects crawled with purpose. In crumbled forts and rotted tunnel, masked prophets whispered of rebirth through pain. And in one silent stronghold, an aristocrat turned his entire house into a temple. The Shaded Castle. There, a nobleman named Malek Marais ruled a sickly domain of poison and prosthetics. He did not worship the Earth Tree. He did not fear the rot. He called Malenia not a curse, but a saint. Obsessed with her prosthetics, her strength, her survival, Malay began collecting limbs, not just armor, but severed parts. His shrine wasn't metaphorical, it was anatomical. To him, rot was not the end of beauty, it was its purification. He wore a prosthetic similar to Malenia's. He bled from within. He prayed not to be healed, but to be remade, and he was far from alone. Beneath the world, in the Grand Cloister, another group worshipped Rot more directly, the Kindred of Rot. Insectoid monstrosities, some of which were once human, guarded the remains of a scorpion-shaped god, likely the original vessel of the Scarlet Rot itself. These beings did not serve Malenia as a person. They revered her as a manifestation of their god's divine will. They wielded weapons like the scorpion stinger, crafted from the tail of the sealed rot god. To them, a blade that caused rot was not a weapon, it was a communion. They lived among scarlet butterflies, tending to fungal altars, walking barefoot across plague-soaked stone. Some even said that Malenia's bloom was a prayer answered, a sign that the rot god had not been sealed. Not truly. And high above them all, in the chambers of the Halictree, Malenia lay in silence, unmoving, unresponsive, her body whole, but waiting. Waiting for what? A third bloom? A betrayal? A new vessel? The rot had become fate. The goddess had become myth. And still, the god inside her stirred. Where there is rot, there is rebirth. And where there is Malenia, there are those made in her image. Her influence did not end with her slumber beneath the Halictree. It spread quietly, like a whisper between spores, and it grew daughters. One such daughter was Millicent. Discovered in the swamps of Caelid, near the site of Malenia's bloom, Millicent was found half dead, missing an arm, riddled with scarlet rot. But unlike the afflicted, who screamed in pain or dissolved into madness, Millicent endured. She did not beg for mercy, she did not curse her fate, she simply asked for aid. And someone answered, Gowry, a strange old man, perhaps a mage, perhaps something worse, who had long studied the rot not as disease, but as divinity. Gowry saw in Millicent more than potential. He saw a fragment, an echo of Malenia, a bud waiting to bloom. He guided her, tended her rot, helped her claim a prosthetic arm, and all the while he whispered one lesson. Through pain comes grace, through betrayal comes transformation. Millicent's journey mirrors Malenia's, but twisted through tragedy. She doesn't remember who she is. She has no past, only a sickness, a prosthetic, and a question. Why am I still alive? As she travels the lands between, she battles her own sisters, literal duplicates grown in rot-infested places. These women, called the Blossoms, were seeded by the same god, tended by the same cults, and bred not to live, but to die in bloom. Millicent was the last and strongest of them. When you, the Tarnished, help her fight these sisters, she begins to change. Not just physically, but spiritually. She becomes graceful, determined. She thanks you, she trusts you, she begins to hope. But hope is not what the rot wants. And in her final moment, you're given a choice, not between good and evil, but between mercy and meaning. If you betray her, as the cult intends, she blooms. If you defend her, protect her from her fate, she dies, but doesn't become the next goddess, because the truth is clear. Betrayal is fertilizer. The scarlet rot needs pain, it needs the breaking of bonds. Only through trust, shattered, can the third bloom take root. So who is Millicent? A clone? A daughter? A discarded piece of Malenia? Or is she something more terrifying? A seed, a sacrament of a god who learned that the best flowers grow not from peace, but from sacrifice. The spell known as Scarlet Aeonia contains a cryptic line: with the third bloom she shall become a true goddess. Simple and chilling. It suggests that Malenia, for all her might, for all her rot, for all her ruin, is not yet finished. She has bloomed twice, but with the third she will ascend, not just as a vessel, but as a god incarnate. The question that haunts us players, lore seekers and scholars alike is, what constitutes a bloom? And has the third already happened? Bloom 1. Caelid. The first bloom is the most obvious. The Battle of Aeonia. In her duel with Radan, as the needle of unalloyed gold shattered and the god within took control, Malenia released the Scarlet Aeonia, a cataclysmic blossom of decay that ended an entire kingdom. It marked the point where Malenia stopped resisting and started transforming. Caelid's death was her first birth. Bloom 2, her boss fight. The second bloom is found within her own chamber, deep beneath the Halictree. There, you, the Tarnished, face her in what appears to be a final duel. She is already powerful, already rotting, already divine, but when you reduce her health to 0, something happens. She rises again, her wings unfurl. She speaks not as a warrior, but as a goddess. Her second phase is not merely a power-up, it is a rebirth. She transforms into the avatar of Scarlet Rot, complete with wings, petals, and divine authority. This is widely accepted as her second bloom, the moment where her body becomes something beyond flesh. But it's not the last. Bloom 3, a mystery. If she's bloomed twice, where is the third? Some believe it happens off-screen, in the quiet moments after her death. Outside her chamber, nestled in the roots of the Halictree, there lies a second Scarlet Aeonia, fully bloomed. The player never sees it bloom. It simply is there. Was it her final act? A delayed bloom released in death? Or was it someone else's? Millicent's bloom. If the third bloom belongs to Malenia, she has ascended. If it belongs to Millicent, then the god still waits. And this matters, because Millicent's final fate, much like Malenia's, hinges on choice. If she is betrayed, she blooms. If not, she dies resisting. Some theorize that Millicent is the true third bloom, the fruit of Malenia's influence, of the god's plan, of Gowry's manipulations. If this is true, the Scarlet Rot doesn't need a goddess to ascend. It only needs enough blossoms to resurrect the god itself. A future bloom, others believe the third bloom hasn't happened yet, that it will be the centerpiece of a future tale, perhaps in the long-awaited DLC, or in an age beyond. Perhaps Malenia's third bloom will not occur through battle or betrayal, but through Miquella. Remember, he was taken, and his motives remain unknown. What if the final betrayal comes from him, not out of cruelty, but because, in his eyes, the only way to save his sister is to let her fully become what she was always meant to be, a goddess, of rot, of rebirth, of silence. Whatever the answer, the message is clear. The story is not over, and the flower has not finished blooming. She lies still, not dead, not truly alive, somewhere between breath and bloom, between steel and soil, between divinity and decay. Malenia the Severed, Blade of Miquella, goddess of rot. Her story is not yet complete. Because rot does not end. It lingers, it waits. It thrives in the forgotten corners, in the things left unsaid, in the pain we bury beneath golden armor. Her legacy is scattered like spores, in the clean rot knights who march, knowing each step brings them closer to becoming what they fear. In the cultists who graft prosthetics in her honor, in Millicent who may yet carry her will, in the bloom that never closes, in the scarlet butterflies that drift across Caelid's silent fields, in the whispers from beneath the Halictree where the petals still fall in spirals, and in you, the Tarnished, who walked into her chamber not just to fight, but to witness. She did not ask to be this, she did not want to be your enemy, but you. You may be the only one left to decide whether her story ends in glory, in godhood, or in peace. And that wraps up today's lore deep dive. Thanks so much for watching. If you have any ideas about characters' lore you would like to see next, feel free to drop your thoughts in the comments, and I always read them, I promise.